Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hat of Many Things. It may not be the evening where you are, but it is where I am, so you're going to deal with it for this episode. You're joining me, Mike, and I'm with
Tom.
And joining us today are Will and Wade. In that order, could we please say hi, folks?
Hello.
Good day.
And those are the voices you'll be recognising. You might not recognise my voice for the next 30 minutes to an hour as we play back some pre-recorded footage that I was not available for. Footage is not the same as recording. Some pre-recorded audio. We wanted to discuss some things pre-GenCon, some things post-GenCon, and hopefully you don't miss my dulcet tones for the next however many minutes these gentlemen managed to speak for.
Movie magic. We're going to be discussing board games, conventions, and GenCon 50 with William and Wade.
Hello, my name is William. I collect board games.
Ahoy, I'm Wade, and I also have an absurdly large collection of board games. It's not actually that large.
There'll be a picture in the show notes of Wade and I next to towers of board games we owned in 2014, so you can only imagine how many more board games we've bought since then.
I'm not far from triple figures.
No, am I? That collection, is it like both of your collections of board games assembled, or is it?
It was our current collections we had in our flat in Manchester, next to each other, stacked up, to compare. And mine only won because Jenga, if you put it on its end, is tall.
Hashtag cheating.
I posted some pictures of my collection a few months ago, the chat.
Well, that, again, can also go into the show notes. And I'm sure Mike has a picture as well of some of his.
I suppose we should really talk about what GenCon 50 actually is. GenCon is the longest running tabletop gaming expo in the world. It's currently based in Indianapolis. It hasn't always been, but it's the largest in scale and attendance in the world, and it's an opportunity for distributors, developers to show off their new games. And already, in the days before GenCon 2017, they've released snippets of information and unexpected announcements. It's all very exciting. If you follow conventions of any sort, then it is the hobby's biggest one for board gaming.
But it's a lot further away than Essen.
It is a lot further away than Essen and UK Games Expo. We need to talk.
From that.
Yeah. Wade, had you heard?
Hello.
Do you know much about Gen Con? I'm in a position where I'm aware it's a thing, but because I've never had to go to it, I've just always been like, oh, stuff comes out there, but I'm sure it'll be at Essen.
Yeah, no, I know of it mostly through the Dice Tower because I watch a lot of their stuff on YouTube and they mention it, and so I know it's the biggest con of all the games. Not as in like they're conspiring and stealing your money. Convention. They might be stealing your money, but it's not theft. No, that is fair. Anyway, I know it's like the biggest one, but personally, as I say, I've never been. I don't bother keeping up to date with what's coming out there because at the end of the day, I'll just watch some other reviews or Google it afterwards. And as you say, it will come out somewhere where I'm more interested or more likely to find it.
So it's interesting that you mention Essen, because there's definitely two major board game producing nations in the world.
Yes.
They are the United States of America in all its glory.
Yeah.
And Germany.
And Germany. So it's not immediately obvious, but the publishers of board games, they also fit very neatly into those two regions, as it were. So GenCon is the American one. The Americans are also a lot more, how to put this?
Diplomatically? Is that how you're trying to put it?
No. What's the word? Promiscuous? When it comes to publishing board games. They put out a lot more than Germany does.
I mean, they are like 5 times the size of Germany in sheer number of people, so...
Yeah, I mean, but they're more... The designers put out more games. And you can say that might be actually be questions of quality involved, but no, the designers of the games...
Produce more.
Move more freely between publishers. But the publishers themselves... So the American publishers put out more games on a year-by-year basis. So one of the reasons GenCon is one of the biggest exhibitions is because... conventions, is because they're putting out more content. and then International Spieltag in Essen, or we keep mentioning UK Games Expo, but that's just because it's the local one.
And it's like a tenner to get in, so that's kind of cool.
Yes.
Was it? Was it only that?
Yeah, it's like a tenner for a weekend ticket, I think. It might just be a tenner on the day.
I mean, I didn't know. I got paid to be there.
It is very cheap, and Essen's only €33 for 4 days. I think I assume GenCon is also quite cheap to get into. It's the cost of getting there that is prohibitive to us.
Yes, but the for the 5th year in a row, it's sold out.
Jeez. How many tickets
In
are there?
Indianapolis.
How much space for people?
It's America, so it's all huge. It's all huge on scale. The convention center is basically a town unto itself, with hotels, restaurants, exhibition halls, plenty. I've seen the map for GenCon where all the stands are. It's for people who have been to International Spieltag or in Essen. It's like spread across 7 halls, I believe.
Yes, roughly. Yeah, with like a bit in the between. Yeah.
Now, for GenCon, there are less halls, but they're all about the same size as those 7 halls.
Wow. Okay.
So it's big. It's a big convention, and it's the blockbuster opportunity for the headline announcements. So the one that immediately comes to mind, because
4th edition?
Twilight Imperium 4?
is the announcement of TI4, the latest edition of Twilight Imperium, the game of which my favourite game's spin-off universe is based. And I'd like to say nobody saw it coming, but it was kind of spoiled by a web developer pushing something to their website ahead of time.
Yeah. It appeared via you and then also via the Reddit to me. So
Was I your source of that?
You beat Reddit by about 5 minutes, as far as I was concerned. Yeah.
Even I knew TI4 was coming out.
Yeah, I mean, it's been on the horizon. But at the same time, everyone was still holding out for a reprint of the expansions for TI3, because they were holding it on the FFG and out in the pipeline. Because what FFG do is they have a website, a web page where they basically give the status of all their products, whether it's widely available, if it's on a boat to the US where it will then be distributed, whether it's having some final touches done post-development, whether it's awaiting a reprint, and for the longest time, the 2 expansions for Twilight Imperium 3 have been awaiting reprints. So people were like, oh, they're not going to publish that, they're awaiting reprints for their own previous expansions. The effect on the price of Twilight Imperium 3, which is usually a very expensive game. I guess we should say what Twilight Imperium is. It's one of the longest and heaviest... Well, I wouldn't say...
Not heavy.
It's one of the longest and most epic games you can play.
Wait, when we played it, how long did it take? Like 8 hours?
We set up at 5, we had dinner, and then we called it early at 5 o'clock in the morning.
About 12 hours then.
So that was 12 hours.
I've never played it. Yeah, it's a long game.
Luckily for us, someone at Surrey GameSock happens to own a copy, so we were able to play it. But it was like a 48-hour gaming weekend, and we had to specific plan for it. And as you say, like it was like an hour or 2 of setup, and then like 12 hours of play with some dinner in between.
But the price of TI3, which is normally a very expensive game, has dropped by about £30.
Yeah, it's down to like 70 odd.
It's down to 50. You can buy it for £50.
£50. Good heavens. That's like...
low enough to make me consider buying the old version before the new version appears.
It's a bargain for the amount of stuff you get.
Yeah, well, board game rights, yeah. Which is something we can talk about later, because board games and their monetary value are really fascinating. So yes, GenCon. Twilight Imperium 4, one of the biggest announcements I've seen so far. Tom has posted a link into our chat to the preview. The preview is a good thing to go through. Let's see if there's anything that catches our eye. I'd also like to, on the subject of GenCon, while we're here, I'd also like to talk about GenCart. I don't know if either of you have heard about GenCart.
No.
No, I assume is that the card game equivalent of GenCon?
No, not GenCart. Gen can't.
Oh, I see.
What?
So Gen cannot. So the idea with GenCon is, yes, it's the biggest tabletop gaming convention in the world. There's lots of people who can't go to it in Indianapolis due to geography, finances, ourselves, yes, being stuck in the rainy British Isles. So GenCon is basically a online equivalent for GenCon.
Okay.
There's a prize raffle. People, all you really need to do is subscribe to the Board Game Geek Guild, and they've got about 250 games which have been donated by publishers, just so people can feel involved with GenCon without actually attending. And there's been so far for GenCon, they've had basically a designer competition where people have created their own print and play games, which you can download yourself and try out, just so you can feel like you're trying new games. They have merch. It's a fun little side project. It's like an anti-convention.
That's quite cool. I like that idea.
That's pretty cool.
Well, I'm just scrolling through. There's the obligatory Cthulhu expansion for Love Letter, of course.
Is it an expansion or is it just a briefing?
Well, it's a standalone, yeah. What else have I'm just going to say that in passing. There seems to be... I've seen a lot of expansion stuff. I'm currently on AEG, so there's a lot of letters to go through. Smash Up has an expansion coming. Thunderstone has an new version / expansion coming.
No, it's a new version.
There's a 10th anniversary version of Notre Dame. I'm not sure I played the original, but I think I've heard of it.
I've heard of it.
It's originally made by Ravensburger.
Is that an expansion for Sheriff of Nottingham?
Yes, I think there is an expansion for Sheriff of Nottingham, and it was co-made by Tom Vassell from the Dice Tower.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, there's the Hunt for the Ring, which is the Letters of Whitehall, Lord of the Rings analogue, basically where one player plays the Fellowship and the rest of the players play the Nazgul trying to hunt them down.
Oh, why is that an expansion? I was looking through the list and I sighed when I saw Epic Spell Wars of the Battle Wizards an expansion. I was just like, that game doesn't need an expansion. Doesn't need it.
Oh, Queen Domino. Yeah, they're going to be showing
Queen
that.
Domino or King Domino?
Oh, King Domino is probably going to do very
I
well.
wouldn't be surprised. I've heard good things.
You've had King Domino, for those who don't know, is the game that won this year's Spiel des Jahres, which is, I suppose, the premium board game.
Yeah, I was going to ask that actually. I was going to say, as far as I'm aware, all the critical awards that people care about seem to be the German ones. I didn't know if there were American equivalents.
Tends to be Spiel des Jahres tends to be focused more family orientated games though.
But then you have the Kenner Spiel des Jahres.
And isn't there something critics prize as well?
Yeah, they have basically there's the Spiel des Jahres, which is a family friendly game. Then there's the kids version of Spiel des Jahres, which is a much more family friendly focused than the already family friendly Spiel des Jahres. And then there's I think it's called Kenner Spiel des Jahres, which is the more heavy adult board game. And this year I think Terraforming Mars was a nominee. I'll have to check. That was a while ago now.
It's a game called Virus, about a virus that infects people, and that's... I know that's not someone I thought... It's not the designer I thought it was, but that looks mildly amusing.
There's 21 pages of this. The Palace of Mad King Ludwig is a game that already existed, which I own. There's a new version with new art sets and some slightly modified rules.
Does that include the expansion, do you reckon?
What, secrets? I don't think it does include all aspects of the expansion. It doesn't involve the... secret passageways. I think it includes the swans, which lots of people weren't happy about because it wasn't most people's favourite part of the game. But I also think they've changed it around so you're not all building your own palace.
Oh no, that's right. Yeah, I have heard about that. You're all building one collectively.
You're all building one castle collectively, which is interesting because it also reminds me of another game where you're all playing against each other but building something collectively, which I recently kickstarted. I recently kickstarted Founders of Gloomhaven, which has a very similar gameplay mechanic. So I found that one interesting. But I already own Castles of Mad King Ludwig. So
great game, that one.
Photosynthesis looks interesting.
It has an interesting mechanic in it.
The Godfather, Corleone's Empire, has a lot of hype around it. I believe that's a CMON game.
It was being demoed at UKGE by our team. I wasn't on it. They played it in the hotel. It looked interesting. I mean, from what I can remember of it, bodies, when they happened, they floated down the river. I can remember that being a mechanic. That just sounds cool.
Sounds very thematic. But no, the CMON set of games is always interesting because, for those who don't know, CMON produce incredibly detailed miniatured games. So when we were speaking earlier about games which come with minis in them, almost all of Cool Mini or Not's games come with minis. So in this list, there's the new Rising Sun, which they kickstarted earlier this year. Mike backed that, so he'll have some input. Zombicide is another game. I own Zombicide Black Horde and Black Horde? No, Black Plague.
Okay.
And this is Zombicide Green Horde, where the zombies are all ferocious
Nice.
zombie orcs. Yes.
I mean, does it really need?
Does it need
another
yet
version?
more miniatures?
I don't.
I mean,
think
the
so.
people I know who own it would probably say yes, it needs more miniatures because they already own like 6 massive crates of zombies.
I can see that being something Brookles would get.
I mean, he already has all the others, right?
yeah.
I got Black Plague off eBay cheap. It was a damaged box. Dear Leo. There's the Song of Ice and Fire tabletop
Ooh.
miniatures game.
Don't tempt me.
Really?
No.
Have you not
clearly
heard of this?
No.
This is the Game of Thrones Warhammer.
That sounds amazing. What are the different factions? Are they all the different houses?
But the houses, yes. It's got an interesting thing. So, yes, there's the combat aspect to it, where you have the armies moving around. But there's also a sideboard. And you have minis representing the non-combat characters of Game of Thrones. So, Varys and Sansa, Tyrion.
Littlefinger, etc.,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah, and those can be used in like a politics phase to influence the battlefield and combat, when reinforcements arrive, that sort of thing.
I mean, that sounds interesting. Does it include? Is it only kind of Westerosi men based, or does it also involve North of the Wall and?
So at the moment, it's being kickstarted.
Dragon expansion.
Right.
So Kickstarter right now. It won't be when the podcast goes out, but it's the starter set, Stark versus Lannisters.
Okay, cool.
Right. So it's 2-player, or is it more than 2-player?
Well, it's a starter set for a tabletop.
Most tabletop
game.
miniatures games tend to be 2-player to start with, and then they add in rules to. Yeah.
You can just really you can split control of the arm. It's like that. It's like Warhammer.
Rick and Morty Close Rick counters the Rick kind deck building game. That's either going to be amazing
God's
or
sake.
awful. Like there's going to be nowhere in between. It's going to either be absolutely hilarious for people who love Rick and Morty, or it's going to just be a terrible deck building game with a theme stuck on it.
I've seen people play it. It's a deck building game. Let me put it that way.
For the record, listeners, I don't like games which are just take a theme that's really popular at the time and just slap on a game and hope it sells well. So, like this Cthulhu nonsense that keeps churning out, not a massive fan of all these Cthulhu slaps on games, not a massive fan of all these zombie slaps on games. There are some really good Cthulhu and zombie games out there, but they are probably the earlier ones before it became a craze. I don't like these crazes. I'm a bit of a hipster.
I think things like you say with the Cthulhu thing, it's when it's things like Eldritch Horror or Arkham Horror that were specifically designed with that theme in mind by people who
those are
really
both really good
enjoyed the
games.
mythos. Then you get a really good game. And then when it's just, we're going to make Love Letter but with green dice, I'm kind of like, I don't care.
Yeah. What's the point? Or like the obligatory Cthulhu expansion for pretty much any game.
Yeah.
It's like, why is it obligatory? Because people would see Cthulhu and go, oh, I bloody love Cthulhu. Who gives a toss? Just play a normal, buy a better game, spend better things with your money.
You mentioned sticking a game on a theme. I don't like people sticking themes on games. So a few years ago, there was one really, really popular deck building game. And now we have a lot of them. A few years ago, there was one really, really popular cooperative game. Now the market's almost flooded. So there's a similar thing which happens with the actual mechanics which are being used. I suppose it's almost malaise or fatigue. You can get theme fatigue, you can get mechanic fatigue as well.
The thing with the mechanics, though, is that's fair enough. People see that, board game designers will play a lot of games, and they'll see something and go, oh, I like that. That's interesting. That inspires me to do this a bit. So if they take it and do something new with it, that's cool. Because you say there were a lot of deck builders. Obviously, you're referring to the original kind of deck builder Dominion. I have a lot of deck builders which are completely different from Dominion.
Oh, yeah, the slight variation. And I'm guessing you own other games like Arctic Scavengers, or
I don't actually have Arctic Scavengers,
but you've played it and heard of it.
Yeah, it's a great game. I do have a game which is essentially Dominion, but with maids called Tanto Cure, and I'll confess that the only thing that makes it better than Dominion is the symbology. Other than that, it is exactly the same as Dominion, just with nicer artwork. And so, if a bunch of those came out with different themes, but they were the same thing, I'd get annoyed at that. but because it's only one, I kind of let it slide because it's one of my favorite little on-the-side games.
Talking about slapping themes on things, Fantasy Flight Games are releasing a Game of Thrones Catan at GenCon.
What?
You know how there's the pre-rating because games haven't come out properly? It's got a rating of 2.9 at the moment. I don't know if that's one angry review.
Yes, but the thing is, on Board Game Geek, people are aware that people can basically pre-order games and then give it a 10 because they're excited about it. So there is actually a strong movement on Board Game Geek. For those who don't know, the central hub of the board gaming hobby online, there's an active movement to give upcoming games 1 votes until they actually come
No,
out.
it's clearly surrounded by other games that have kind of sensible numbers that are also released this year, and I don't know if that's just because, admittedly, some of those are for sale, so maybe that's it. But I feel like that one has been specifically targeted more than anything else I've scrolled past. It's the only one with a red sticker next to it.
Well, I mean, it is just the theme on top of a game that already exists. There aren't going to be many original twists in that, I don't think.
So if you can't tell, we're really excited about the games that they're going to be presenting at Gen Con. There's lots of very interesting titles in there. We will join back up with Mike and carry on discussing after Gen Con.
Movie magic.
Now I'm back, and we're going to resume our post-Gen Con spiel. Gentlemen, highlights of Gen Con. What do we think?
Well, where to start? There was so much there. And I think the most interesting thing about the Fantasy Flight in-flight report was the fact that the CEO wasn't present.
That's not a good sign for the business usually.
Well, it's interesting with Fantasy Flight because for those of you, I imagine my colleagues on the podcast don't know, the podcasters don't know, is that Fantasy Flight Games, its CEO is actually one of its first designers, Christopher Peterson, who has very recently released the latest version of his hit board game, the one that everyone knows him for, Twilight Imperium. So he is actually the designer of that game. So on the day of the Fantasy Flight in-flight report, instead of actually giving the in-flight report, he was down in the showroom doing demos with his new version of the game.
Now that is much better than the initial implication of a CEO not being somewhere. Because you told me the CEO wasn't there, and I assumed there was something going on, like maybe an impending resignation, or, I'm too used to a corporate environment rather than a hobbyist environment.
Yeah,
so
indeed.
The fact that he was personally demonstrating the game he'd personally designed shows a real clear connect with the hobby still, as well as his fans, and I think that's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. Unfortunately, the 2 people he left behind to do the in-flight report, not so great.
Oh, is there a competency issue?
There was almost a competency issue. They bundled through it. There was a lot of pre-recorded VTs that they went through. They did some announcements.
VT?
A videotape.
Okay. That seems like an unnecessary acronym.
It saves 2 syllables.
No, it didn't. It cost us many more.
It's like any medical acronym.
I just always call them VTs in presentations. Like, roll the VT.
Do you
aspire
have a
to be.
greasy ponytail? Does everything need to be bigger and better than the last time?
Of course, Mike, of course. You know I don't
Listen
have a
on my
ponytail.
ponytail.
See, I'm used to my board meetings usually have people still trying to work out how to turn Skype on, so...
Oh, wow. It's pretty bad.
Right.
But no,
they rolled their VTs. How many syllables? Right, I want somebody that listens to this to count how many syllables we wasted. They played the VTs, Will. Continue.
They played the VTs. Everyone was expecting some big announcements around Fantasy, because Fantasy Flight Games currently holds the franchise for Star Wars, the franchising rights. So they make Star Wars board games. There are some
Examples?
Star Wars Rebellion, which
Okay.
is a very heavy 2-player strategy game where one player plays the Rebel side and one player plays the Empire side. They play differently. The Rebel side, they have a hidden base somewhere in the galaxy. The Empire side, they control the galaxy.
Are they also responsible for Armada and X-Wing, or...?
They are also responsible for Armada and X-Ray, but those are
Imperial
games.
Assault as well. That's the other
Imperial
big
Assault as well is another one, and this is what I was getting to. They've announced a new tabletop miniatures game called Star Wars Legion. And it's a departure for...
Which looks really cool.
It does look really cool, but when you realise that the miniatures, which is a bit of a departure for Fantasy Flight games, aren't going to be painted.
You mean pre-painted?
Pre-painted, yes. So one of the good things, debatably, about X-Wing and Armada is that the starships come pre-painted in Star Wars regalia. You don't have to paint the miniatures like in other miniatures games.
But for a lot of players who do pick up miniatures games, assembly and or painting is a huge part of the appeal. It's not a negative for that particular market, is it?
How many ways can you paint a Star Wars ship?
Well, as many as you really want.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the...
How many colours of paint can you buy?
How many ways can you paint a Stormtrooper?
How many? Well, they're white in the show, but there are an awful lot of colours of paint out there.
There are an awful lot of colours of paint, but...
And there are lots of kind of expanded universe people.
And if anyone gets upset at my Pride Troopers, well, we can have discussions. We can have discussions about that.
I would pay
Rainbow
to see
Marines.
Pride Troopers.
If you buy me Stormtrooper minis, right, I will paint you Pride Troopers.
Amazing.
You've heard it. It's on the podcast. If Wade buys me Stormtrooper minis, I will paint Pride Troopers.
I don't know why we're limiting that to Wade. Anyone in the audience could buy you Stormtrooper minis, Mike.
Yep.
You're limiting yourself here.
It might be harder for them to get them to him since we don't have a PO box or anything.
Tweet us or pop on Reddit, and we'll arrange this. I will always accept free minis.
But yeah, it's a departure from what Fantasy Flight games have done previously. And
Is it though? Because Rune Wars
hasn't really taken off.
but they tried it.
Yes. And that's where people fear Legion will go.
But they have an IP. And I think one of the biggest problems with Rune Wars, from an outside perspective, someone who's not really in on the market, is potentially that they were competing with huge IPs. It can be mechanically brilliant, but the IP is a huge factor.
Yeah, that was my takeaway from the Fantasy Flight in-flight report.
Okay, Wade, did you watch or read any of GenCon post?
Genuinely didn't see much of it. I know that a lot of people got excited about the Fallout board game though.
Okay,
Yes.
who's producing that?
I mean,
Well,
what?
I'm
Oh
sure
dear.
you know the answer.
Who's the publisher for Fallout?
Yep.
It's Fantasy Flight.
There we
Oh,
go.
is it Fantasy Flight as well?
Yes,
So,
it's Fantasy
Chances
Flight.
are, if it's got a theme on it, if it's got a big IP on it, it's probably them. They're also responsible for the Game of Thrones Catan, in that they are the Game of Thrones side of it. And then the rest of that has been made by someone else. Like, it just gets Fantasy Flight's name
They
on
are
the
one
box
of the
because
biggest
they
and
hold
most
all of
successful
the licenses.
publishers.
So they're just publishing it, they're not producing it.
Let me check that.
I don't think they did design it. But
And
they
for
might have done.
anyone who is not picking up on this so far, Will is basically Google for board games. So if you tune into the show because you like listening to me and Tom, there's going to be a lot more Will today. If you tune in because you actually want to hear about board games today, well, you're in for a treat.
So it's designed by Andrew Fisher and Nathan E. Hayjak, who I've never heard of. But the publishers are Fantasy Flight Games and, by extension, Asmodee. So
Okay. And why is the Fallout board game exciting other than the fact that it's a Fallout board game? Or is it just the IP?
I think it's just the IP.
And I
It's-
think it will appeal to a lot of other people as well. And it looks like it's going to. Right, it's got some really nice minis to start. They look really nice, and they're not painted, so people can go to town on them and make them look really, really cool.
And I think
Um,
a little bit later we should have a discussion just on IP. But
Also
um,
miniatures.
And it's
And
got
really-
hexes, and people bloody dig hexes. Actually, no, they're
true.
octagons.
wait,
My apologies. They're
are
octagons.
hexes important?
No, they are hexes. Oh my god, I can't do sides.
Just
People
count
just
the
like
sides.
hexagons.
What you can do, just picture the shape, count from the bottom, and go clockwise. How many sides does it have?
It's got six.
I
It's a
want to
hexagon.
hear you count them out loud.
One. That one's off screen, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
All right, good news, everyone. It appears to have 6 sides. It is, in fact, a hexagon.
At least it's not a septagonal game. That would be confusing.
That would be ridiculous. Let's hope they never exist.
Oh, there's a link.
I mean, I
Did you say this has
Off the
minis?
top of my head, I think there's a problem with 7 sides from a maths point of view where you have to tessellate weirdly.
Yes, it has minis.
Well, that might just be 5s. Anyway.
Okay, they're not bad quality minis. I'd say they're pretty standard quality. They're not low quality, they're not absurdly high quality, but they're certainly good.
Yeah, for Fantasy Flight games, they're pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, that's quite pretty. Although the unexplored hexes look kind of odd. Very digital, but I suppose that's Fallout, isn't it? So we've got Fallout. Tom, was there anything that caught your eye regarding GenCon?
Yeah, so I shared a set of photos earlier in the week with you guys.
I don't click things you share me, Tom. I assume it's going to be something
You pain me.
inappropriate.
You
not
pain me
safe
to the
for work.
core.
They were an excellent set of pictures.
No, that conversation doesn't have a not safe for work
Pictures
tag,
of
so I
you
don't
in
share anything not safe
hats
for
and
work.
not much else.
Or is it the hat?
And
the
if
hat
anybody
is,
wants those, tweet us.
we'll give them to you in exchange for Star Wars miniatures.
We'll swap nudes of Tom for minis. Back to board games.
So there's a few highlights from there that I would like to pick out quickly. Rising Sun by Eric Lang is out.
I
and
kickstarted.
the models in that look lovely.
I kickstarted that and it was 90% the minis. I know very little about how the game plays. Those miniatures are gorgeous.
Yeah, I've just heard so much about it at this point.
But the Kickstarter version has some really nice features as well. It's got... I've ordered the metal coins. Once again, we'll get onto tactile later. It's got these nice little mahjong tiles in the Kickstarter version for the politics maneuvers rather than cards. So they click really nicely. The Kickstarter comes with a whole boatload of extra miniatures that don't appear to currently be available in any sort of expansion packs. You know, there's just so much incentive to kickstart cool mini or not games, I think.
I told you he'd have a lot to say about this last week.
Well, I backed it, so it's something that,
Yeah.
I've not played anywhere near the number of games you guys have, board game-wise. So, the areas that I can talk about are more limited, but there will be enthusiasm. So,
yeah.
So,
That's why we love you.
what about it caught your eye, Tom? Not knowing that I'd kickstarted it.
As I say, I've heard about it for some time now, and I hadn't realised it was coming out at GenCon officially. That's how it appears to be based on this photo. And also, yeah, those miniatures are lovely. They've got, I think it's like a Chinese dragon miniature.
There are two
Looks
in
lovely.
Kickstarter. There's the Earth Dragon.
There's one that's in close in.
Yeah, I think there's an Earth Dragon and a Fire Dragon.
And it looks like a good strategy game from what I can see. I mean, judging entirely on the photograph here.
Each of the clans plays very differently as well. Like, they each have a unique power. One clan can move from any space on the board to any space on the board. Another can use cash and mercenaries interchangeably. Another has strongholds that can move. And another... Well, there's a couple more. I can't remember top of my head. But yeah, they all appear to play very differently. It's got a couple of unique mechanics. Like, it's minimum 3 or 4 players, I think. Because alliances are a key part of the game. And the alliance tokens, once again, are very nice because they're like in the shape of yin and yang. So when you make an alliance, you put them together.
That's cool.
Oh, that's clever.
That is cool.
like
And
that.
there are huge rewards for breaking an alliance as well as for being in one. If you're in one, every time either you or your ally take certain actions, the other person benefits. Whereas if you break an alliance, you lose honour, and honour is the tie-breaking mechanic.
Okay, yeah.
So there's some interesting stuff there.
Another game that caught my eye, well, we talked about it in the pre-Gen Con part of the episode, is the Song of Ice and Fire miniatures game.
Yes.
And I've now seen some pictures of it, and it looks... Well, so the picture here, they have units of about 12 on square bases that fit round bases of the miniatures.
With some very average quality minis.
Yeah, the miniatures are a bit lower quality, but it reminds me a bit of the old style of Warhammer Fantasy, where you would have the square bases you push around.
Yeah,
for units.
so this is what Will said to me about it. Will said it basically plays like Warhammer Fantasy 6th or 7th edition, to which I went, well, that's great, because that doesn't exist anymore, and Age of Sigmar is horrible.
Yep, I imagine that would be most people's
It
feeling.
also has this side mechanic going on where you can send figures to essentially build up support for your army. It's like a politics phase.
Does it count as board games, though? Is wargaming and tabletop minis Just a subgroup of board gaming, or is it a whole separate?
See now, if you were to ask someone like me, I would say there's the group board games, and then there's 3 subgroups, one of which is also called board games, which is confusing. And then the other 2 would be
Right.
like tabletop games, and the other one would be card games.
Yeah, so you'd call almost anything that is played on a table a board game, with the
Yes.
table being the board. But then you've got
Yes.
physical board games with a board as a separate.
Yeah, but we're not calling them board squared games.
Yeah,
So that's just stupid.
It's interesting, actually, because the Song of Ice and Fire, the tabletop miniatures war game, is also designed by Eric M. Lang. Again, it's a Fantasy Flight game. So the 2 games that you've so far listed that have caught your eye, Tom, are from very similar progeny, as it were.
Well then, hoping that I've not picked another one by the same guy, Whistle Stop.
No.
Because everyone loves trains.
People
An
do
interesting
love
thing,
trains.
just very quickly, an interesting about the Fantasy Flights Game of Thrones minis game is that they've not chosen to model the characters on the actors in the TV show. They've not chosen.
I think that's good.
I think it's very good for fans of the books who maybe thought that certain characters should look certain ways. Ramsay Bolton, for example, who was far more human and handsome looking in the show. But it's interesting because you would have thought that they would have taken the Games Workshop Lord of the Rings route and just hammered the most popular aspect of it.
I wonder if the difference is that, I mean, I don't know what their plan is for selling this, but Games Workshop already had, at least in the UK, a very big on-street presence, and they could put stuff into, say, Smiths when they released The Lord of the Rings that would catch, kids' eyes, and that's that character I know from that movie I like. Whereas I imagine their past is still, I think chances are people who are into board games are a bit nerdier. They've probably read the Game of Thrones books instead of, as well as watching the series. And also the other Game of Thrones board game that is very popular was made before the series and has that kind of art style and still does very well despite it. So they've probably gone on that gamble, is what I'd assume.
Yeah, no,
I believe it's a rights issue, actually.
Yeah,
Oh, really?
I would have thought that it would cost them an absolute fortune to be able to use the light.
Also, if you haven't seen the series and you get that figure of Kit Harington and you say watch the Spooks film, you go, what the fuck's he doing here?
Whistle Stop.
Oh, sorry, yes, I was scrolling on from that. Whistle Stop is a hex-based train game.
Hexes. Why are hexes popular?
Because they
Because they
tessellate well.
tessellate so well.
Okay.
And they give you more options than squares. As Civilization 6 compared
But
to Civ
why not
4.
dodecahedrons?
Did dodecahedrons tessellate?
I don't fucking know.
There's a mathematical reason they use hexes so
I
much.
don't think
board
they
game.
do.
I'll be honest, I'm not even sure what a dodecahedron is.
What
It's
side?
It's a D20, right?
yeah.
There we
Oh,
go.
hang on, I might be thinking.
No, that's an icosahedron. A dodecahedron is... Oh, gosh.
Wait, is it the 2D or is it the 3D shape?
It's the thing that Cenobites come out of, right?
Well,
Anyway.
This requires a Google.
It's a hex-based trains game.
It's a hex-based trains game, and I don't know a massive amount about it. I've just seen it and gone, ooh, that looks interesting. I do like trains.
I've seen the review.
And it's... I mean, well, Wade can probably fill in a bit more once I've described the look of it, but instead of placing the routes like you do in something like Ticket to Ride, you are placing hexes that have towns, what I assume are towns or stops, and different branching train routes, and you want to try and connect them all up. And then you can place your train models on them in some way. I don't know how the scoring works, though.
So as far as I recall, the board is empty or devoid of hexes, apart from a center row, which has some stations to go in. And it's a pick up and deliver style game where you draw a hex and you put it in front of you, and you can rotate it how you like. And as you say, they have the crisscrossing paths, and then you follow path along. You can pick up the resources and then sell them at the stations, and you get extra points for going to the end of the board.
But after
And
your
as far as I'm aware, you can only go forwards unless you do something special. So
and after the crisscross, do you cha-cha slide?
I believe that is an optional rule. That is in the what are they called? Oh,
the
variants.
Iberian Rails version.
Yeah,
DLC.
yeah, the first expansion, the cha-cha slide.
It also visually, looking at the routes themselves, it reminds me a bit of how Tsuro works, which is the
I was about to say that.
And that I like, so...
I don't know if Mike
That's the
knows.
dragon game, right?
Yeah.
Where you've basically got to try and block each other off.
Yes.
Kind of like two-player Snake.
Yeah. Sarah's really good.
I'm still scrolling down through these images. Just tell me to stop if you get bored of me talking about stuff I've found on this one post. I think there's one that I think you mentioned last time, Will. Laser Riders.
I didn't mention it last time, I don't think, but I
How
definitely
does one
mentioned
ride
it
a
since.
laser?
Imagine Tron bikes, the game.
Yeah, Imagine Tron.
Isn't that if I'm not mistaken, is that the one where you don't have a board, you just have the pieces and you place them in front of each other and you're trying to avoid
Yes.
things?
Yeah.
Yeah, that looks quite cool. I saw that demoed, or maybe I didn't see it demoed. Maybe I saw a very similar
Tom,
concept
resend me
demoed
that
at
so I can see it.
UKGE,
Sounds
and it
cool.
looked really cool.
So this is... You might have to keep going through the images a bit.
Laser Riders.
And then you'll have to scroll through, because
To be fair, it does sound like an 80s cartoon. It sounds like...
Yeah, I mean, they have it on a... They have it on a, like, 80s cartoon. Yeah, if you recall Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, all the 80s style text and font that they use for that, they have a table with that on it
Yeah.
that they're playing
It also looks a lot like Kung Fury.
on. Yes. Or Blood Dragon, Far Cry video game.
Oh wow, there's a photo of Twilight Imperium 4 in here as well.
Yes!
Shockingly, it looks like Twilight Imperium 3.
Which is what I was waiting for.
You would expect some familiarity, wouldn't you?
But the Death Star-like models actually look 3D instead of kind of... Well, I mean, they were 3D before, but they were like sliced in half.
Well, they were only halves, weren't they?
They were only halves, but this time they are complete.
Wait,
spheres.
Centipede? Is that like
Yeah,
the
there's
actual...
a Centipede, the
Is
board
that
game.
the old school like
Yes.
computer game Centipede?
Yep.
Yes. I hope it's better than it sounds.
Yeah. Wade, you sound. I was going to say you sounded excited about that, and that was confusing.
I just-
You really
like,
shouldn't have been.
How do you turn that into a board game? Unless it's like, it would obviously be some kind of cooperative beat
A
the
new
game thing. But
streamlined Civ board game.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like Civ.
They release a new one of those every so often.
Civilization, New Dawn.
Oh, here's the Star Wars Legion minis. They're quite pretty.
They are very pretty.
I suppose it's kind of hard not to make them pretty. They're very simplistic designs in Star Wars. Pickle Rick. I don't think that's...
No, there's just some random photos in
Okay.
there.
Although, I think we'd all play that.
Pickle Rick, the board game. You just dress up as Pickle Rick, shout, "I'm Pickle Rick, bitch!" and run at people.
I think that the objective would be, you'd end up in the sewer and you'd have to escape the sewer. So you'd have to find all the parts to make the suit.
Okay. Yeah.
what if the objective was to become...
Spoiler alert for those who have not watched the latest season of Rick and Morty.
Mate, there are no spoilers in Rick and Morty.
It's true.
It doesn't have a plot. It's just a series of really fucked up dark
Rick and
things.
Terry episode!
Spoilers. Someone say that for me. What am I trying to say?
Spoilers!
Schwezwan.
Schwezwan.
So,
Szechuan.
all right, we're on the Twilight Imperium 4 picture.
Yes.
There are a lot of brightly coloured miniatures.
Yes.
See, I have an issue with this, right?
Oh?
Because you obviously need to be able to tell which colours minis use
Yes.
to be able to play the game. Which means I can't go and paint those.
Yeah.
You
No,
could
no.
paint the bases though. You could just
Yeah,
have the
so-
bases as different colours.
So what Cool Mini or Not did with Blood Rage, I like, where you can paint the minis, but there is a ring that you put around the base.
Yeah.
Now that is a good way of getting around this, because this game would be so much prettier if they weren't just brightly coloured like almost child toy Lego blocks on the board.
There's another problem with the bright colours that they have chosen, and that's that they have red and green together on the board. Is anyone
Hooray!
familiar with combinations of colour blindness which are possible?
We'll have to get our colourblindness expert, who is not currently in my house, to look at that picture and tell us if he could tell the difference.
It's cool. They look like fairly decent quality miniatures for something so small, but the whole game would just be so much nicer if the space stations look like space stations and not cat toys.
It's fine. It's very functional. And so, did the minis really bring any more? They could be replaced with cardboard chips at the end of the day. They could be replaced with proxies. Just like a long time ago, I didn't use all my Warhammer minis. I used bottle caps because I couldn't afford all the miniatures. They're completely superfluous to the actual game itself, but they do add something to it.
And that something is not easily quantifiable, but makes a huge difference to the enjoyment of it for a lot of
It
people.
would. I wouldn't play that if you were using, say, little
boxes.
cardboard triangles or little cubes or something to
It's
represent the
interesting.
ship. So it would just be rubbish, wouldn't it?
Because
Who wants to fly a cube around space? Oh wait, the ball.
really popular equivalent series to Twilight Imperium created by Ryan Lockett and Red Raven Games. They kickstart pretty much everything they do. The first edition of their game Empires of the Void was at the time described as Twilight Imperium Light, so it could be played within 2 or 3 hours, and it didn't have miniatures in, and it sold really well. And it's, if you try and find it now on eBay, it costs like £400. It's debatable what it adds. It's definitely an aesthetic bonus to it. You say you wouldn't play with the cardboard chits, but I bet you would play certain games without miniatures that have miniatures.
I would, but not a 6 to 8 hour long game.
Yes, that's the thing about Twilight Imperium. It takes a long time to play, and the new edition hasn't done anything for that. It's streamlined some of the mechanics. It's made the technology system. No, if we haven't described it well enough, Twilight Imperium 4 is a massive, epic 4X space game.
Acronyms, I know what 4X means, but for anyone who doesn't, explore, expand, exploit, exterminate.
And it's really the granddaddy of the heavy board game. If you were to ask someone what is the heaviest board game they can think of,
I don't think it is that heavy.
Kingdom Death.
It's
or
just
Twilight.
really long.
Twilight, right.
well, it is heavy because it's not an easy game to explain to new players. Proper new players. You can't just bring people who aren't initiated in the hobby up to a table where you've set up Twilight Imperium 4 and say, okay, this is this, this is this, this is this, this
No.
is this.
Counterpoint, Lisa. Lisa played it with no prior experience and very little board. She before Twilight, she'd basically played Monopoly.
How does she do?
They didn't manage to finish the game, but she enjoyed it very much.
No, it is complicated, but I mean, realistically, it boils down to the choice of a card and doing a couple of things, and the rest of it is mechanical rules about things that happen when you do things rather than things that you're trying to do. So, like, if you attack someone, this is the rule for how attacks work.
So how would you describe its complexity?
I mean, I found most of the time in the game came from choosing the bloody roll card, because you'll have one in mind, and they'll come around, and it won't be there. And so then you spend 10 minutes reading the tiny text of all of them, trying to work out which one you want.
And you see, that's just that you're oversimplifying what's going on. People negotiate over what cards they'll take. It's heavy. Okay, so it might not be mechanically complex, but the interactions you have with the other players can be incredibly complex.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
And someone who's not played
It's-
before may not pick up on that early on and then get
Yes.
screwed over, which is problematic.
I mean, Mike, did Lisa win?
Oh, well, they didn't even finish the game.
Exactly.
So I
Yeah.
think one of the issues with huge sprawling board games that take a long time to play are that they appeal to a very niche audience within an already fairly niche, if growing, community.
Hello.
I adore big games, whether it's board games, computer games. Like, I don't want to play StarCraft 2 because it takes 20 minutes. I do want to play Sins of Solar Empire because it can take 6 hours. Like, that's how I feel strategy should be played. It should be a long, drawn-out affair. But I'm not everybody, and StarCraft 2 was significantly more popular than Sins of Solar Empire, just to make a video game comparison. And there's a reason that these huge sprawling board games don't sell quite as well, which is, as Tom said earlier, when we were having a casual chat, you need to devote a whole day or a weekend to it. You can't just bust out and have a quick game. And that means you need people with a certain amount of spare time, with enough interest to spend that much time playing it, which is why I feel that Will is saying that it's not for new players as per se. You might find new players who really enjoy it, but you're going to struggle to get someone who's not that interested in board games to sit down and play a 6-hour board game.
Yeah, you wouldn't do it. I mean, because if they
It's an investment
stop
of time.
enjoying it, that's another, after the first hour, that's another 5 hours of not enjoying it they have. Or they drop out, and then it ruins the game balance because of the way it's set up.
I think something that game designers could do better. Create their games so that players could drop out.
Yeah, you have very strong feelings on this, don't you?
I do.
No,
I feel like all of these are problems that could be solved through game design.
There
I
are quite a
believe-
few games which it doesn't matter too much.
Yeah.
But I can think of a lot of games where it really does make a difference.
I think when you design a game, you're designing people's social interactions for however long a period the game lasts. And games which don't allow players to leave, have an out essentially, are basically trapping those players, and that creates an amount of social tension.
Let's not forget that board games are a very mixed community, but there is a higher than average percentage of people in it, like a lot of geek hobbies, who may struggle with certain social situations. And being trapped in a social situation for someone who struggles to extricate themselves, things like that, can make it even worse for those people who may already struggle with that.
The board gaming community can be actually pretty savage as well against players that are being downers in their board games. If you go to Reddit and you start a thread saying, "Oh, this person left a game, is that bad?" Well, they'll just rip on that person. There's a whole social decorum.
And you know what, let's put that as a talking point for later, which is, not just board games, board game communities and behaviour and unwritten rules. Because unwritten rules are the hardest rules to learn. You can open a board game and you can learn the rules, but you can't learn the rules of board gaming clubs that easily. Or board gaming groups.
But yes.
Most of it is unwritten and unspoken.
Fantasy Flight Games Twilight Imperium 4th edition. It looks beautiful. The rules have been slightly streamlined, but not so much as to detract from previous editions' accomplishments. The new edition includes most of the content of previous edition's expansions, which is always good. It's 20 years old, I believe, this year, and it will be coming out later this year.
So despite Fantasy Flight Games losing a tabletop RP IP license for Warhammer and Games Workshop, they appear to be catching everyone's eye in the board game market, which is where they started, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so who else is doing things? We've spoken about Fantasy Flight Games for a considerable length of time now.
Well, we spoke about
surely
Rails as well.
other people
Another
exist.
interesting, I'm going to have to find out who makes it right now, but Century Spice Road, which is also in that list that I sent you.
Plan B Games.
I knew I'd read it earlier this week. So Plan B Games. The interesting thing about this is, I suppose I should explain to people in the audience who may not know what a legacy game is, and then I'll explain what's interesting about this game. So a legacy game was started off by Legacy Risk, which is where you buy a game and it has new rules and things like that hidden in the box that you access when you do something in the game. And some of these things may involve you ripping up a card and saying this card is no longer in the game because we nuked Australia, to give a Risk example, and something like that. And the game changes and evolves as you play, and you get the same group together, and you play the same game over and over again, and then you are able to change how the game works. And when you're done, you can't reuse that game, but that's what a legacy game is. The thing that's interesting about... Yeah?
As an example, for Legacy Risk, I've been playing part of a Legacy Risk campaign, and so you end up setting
Don't spoil
different... I won't spoil... There won't be many spoilers, but you end up setting different things around the board, like different stickers which affect territories. And one of my friends lost everything they'd previously established in previous games, because we were all like, we can do this thing to do this, let's do it. And then we read the rules and we were like, that's amazing, it does this. And he lost everything he'd ever established, and it was brilliant. What a legacy that was.
In Legacy Risk, you can rip up the territory cards that you get in Standard Risk. It's brilliant. I've been playing a game with my younger brother and sister whenever I see them.
Okay, well, so the reason I'm bringing up legacy games here is there's been, last year at Spiel, there was Fable-style games, and the one that came out was Friedman Friese's Fabled Fruits, which is a game which is like a legacy in that it changes over time because you're unlocking new cards to play with, but you can always reset it back to the way you got it in the box by putting all of the cards back in their original places. But the box allows you to store the state between games, so you can play like a 20-game campaign and then put the box back as it was and start again, which is less destructive because a lot of people have a problem with destroying something they own. So that's another type of game. And then the thing that's interesting about Century Spice Road, and I saw a Kickstarter for a similar game called Nexus something, which is like a space equivalent, is this game in and of itself, it's a standalone game, and it's similar to Splendor. It's described as a Splendor killer in the Ars article that we're going to link to. But they're going to release more Century games that tell a story with that as the starting game, and that's very interesting because we don't know exactly how it's going to work yet.
It's interesting because I have played Century. I've also pre-ordered the special Gollum version because the history behind the creation of Century is kind of broiled in controversy. So it's very interesting to discuss. I wouldn't think there was any story elements to it at all.
No, there isn't. Like, I've played it.
That's why when everyone's kind of like, ooh, this is interesting right now, because they've said it's going to be a game. Is it going to be like you play this game and then that affects another game that will be a separate standalone game? How's it going to work? No one really knows because only this one exists, and Golem is just a reskinning, right, of this one.
So the controversy here is originally they were planning to release 2 versions of this game. There was going to be a Middle East themed one along the Spice Road, and then there was going to be a fantasy themed one with them all as crystal golem caravans delivering crystals to fantasy kingdoms. The distributors of the game only were only really interested in purchasing the Spice Road version, and so the golem version was kind of left to the wayside, but they'd already created all the assets for it. So during GenCon, and this is something that happened at GenCon, if you turned up at the Plan B booth early in the morning, early enough that is, and shouted, "I am here for the golems," they would have given you a free copy of their game, which I thought was charming.
That's really cool.
Yeah, especially considering how it retails for something like $60.
What? It isn't that big a game. It's not worth that much.
I think it's a far better improved version of Splendor. Splendor is the quintessential engine building game where you just accumulate resources and the resources help you get resources, and then eventually, if you have enough resources, you get points. Century is just an improved version of that, really.
Century's different because you end up playing cards instead. So it's you buy, instead of where Splendor, you just have everything out in front of you and you use chips. In Century Spice Road, you you purchase cards that help you do things which chain up your spices and trade them through, and then you use those spices to buy things which are worth points, and then eventually you'll need to draw your cards back into your hand, and you can do that as one of your turns.
Or crystals, if you have the Golem version.
Indeed. I've heard that it's only allowed...
way of pronouncing Golem, bro.
Golem!
The Golems.
It's like a football tournament. Golem!
But yeah, no, the concept that it is part of a series of games sounds interesting. Unfortunately, as it is at the minute, Century Spice Road is a good game, but it's not like interesting in many ways at the minute.
It's a bit pricey when you could get Splendor, but then Splendor as well kind of wears thin very quickly, I find.
Yeah, Splendor's overrated, in my opinion.
I've played it once, I had great fun, but it could be aesthetically or tactilely more pleasing.
I don't know,
But
the chips are really
poker chips are bloody lovely, though. Yeah, they're so good. Best thing about Splendor.
I was going to say, for Century Spice Road, I think for me, I'll wait for it to come down a little bit in price, and then I'll get it because I don't have Splendor, so I don't have an equivalent game. But also, then I'm like, it doesn't. I don't feel like I'll be locked in if the next game in the series is not what we haven't got a clue what it's going to be like. So if that next game in the series works really well and there's some extra rules in there that somehow link them and suddenly it's amazing, that's cool. But also I'll be happy with Century Spice Road in and of itself.
So back to legacy games and the potential issues with them.
Oh, yes. So my copy of Risk Legacy had a manufacturing mistake within it. So
I think our friends did as well. I think I know.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. Though I won't spoil anything, but essentially the way the legacy progresses in the game is there are a certain number of pockets and pouches within the box, and they're sealed, and they have a condition, and when you fulfill that condition during the game, you open that pocket or seal. Our pockets were mislabeled.
Yeah, same with my friend's copy.
And at the time, I built this up for my younger brother and sister because I was like, oh, wow, exciting, legacy, you're about to change the game forever. And so I was filming them. My younger sister was the one who had fulfilled the condition to open the pocket. She was super proud. She opened it up and it made no sense. And what was worse, because the way we decided to retain some format of spoiler, I suppose, some mystery about the future pockets, we decided to go what was in that mislabeled pocket. So it actually ended up affecting the game in a rather upsetting way, and it actually made my sister cry. I contacted Hasbro many a time, because they are the publisher and distributor of the game. They've not done anything about it. They acknowledge it. They say, yep, this happened, tough luck. And I think that's a problem with the legacy format, that it is vulnerable to that sort of essential mess up in production.
But that's also a huge problem in customer service, and that is awful.
Oh yes, I mean, I honestly I don't trust the publisher of Monopoly to do anything beyond the Call of Duty. I mean, actually, they offered me a new set of miniatures, but for what purpose?
Right, that's no good, is it? You've already ruined the surprise.
You've ruined so it's unfortunate. There's a post on Board Game Geek I made months ago, and people still turn up on that post and comment, yes, this happened to me as well. And I was like, really? They haven't cottoned on and recalled this faulty product yet? It's poor service on their part.
We had the same, but luckily, because we're all adults, and as you say, if you had some younger siblings involved, it would have affected them more. But handily, we just read the first sentence and we're like, this doesn't seem right. And we figured then, because the pocket sizes were the same, we opened the other one and went, this makes a lot more sense. And we just switched it, and it was okay because we could all just carry on. And I expect that when Hasbro were like, yeah, who cares? They were just thinking you could do the same as we did. But obviously, if you've got that kind of emotional attachment to it, especially if there's, if you're younger and you're getting really into these things, that's going to really make an impact to the game that is.
The game is advertised for younger audiences. It doesn't have an adult age rating, so yeah, it's unfortunate.
So on to other games and pretty games and miniatures. God, doesn't Dark Souls look nice?
Have you?
Yes,
I mean, that diorama they have. Oh,
that is a Steam Forged Games, I believe.
Have any of you played it?
I haven't. Honestly, I wasn't interested in it because I don't like the Dark Souls computer game. I'm in a minority here. I know it's extremely popular. I don't tend to play video games for quote unquote the challenge. I tend to play them to relax. I like narrative, and I know there is narrative in exploration Dark Souls, and it's really interesting because you have to go find it. It's not spoon fed, but it's hard for the sake of being hard. And that's part of the appeal to a lot of people. It's great. It's for them. It's not for me. It's a target audience issue. I believe that the board game is made by Steam Forged. Is that correct?
Sounds right.
Yes.
The producers of Guild Ball. I know a girl that works for the company. I know nothing about the game, but it's very pretty.
It is very pretty. I'll give it that. The components, especially the miniatures, are really
I assume
nice.
it's going to retail for a high price point.
It does.
It does, yeah. I know some people who have played it.
I've played
it. It plays like Dark Souls.
How does it play, Wade?
So, the thing, if you ever went to any of the expos or places where they were demoing it, you would have played a boss battle. And the boss battle is really the coolest thing about the game. In this game, it has programmable AI for the boss. And if you've ever played the Dark Souls games, it's all about recognizing what the boss is going to do and being able to avoid it and doing the correct attack. It's about to do this attack. It's got this tell. So in the game, they have each boss has a bunch of cards, and you draw a couple of them and you make them into a deck. And then you run through the deck card by card, and each card will tell you how the boss acts. And then when you're done, you flip it back upside down, but you don't shuffle. So if you can remember, you know exactly what the boss is going to do. So the concept there is really cool, that you can try and remember what to do and formulate the best plan, and the boss fights genuinely were really fun. The problem I have with the game is the rest of the game is you're going through these rooms and you're killing monsters, and they have a similar kind of programmable movement, but they just do the same thing over and over again, like go towards the closest person or shoot and move away. And then you kill them for souls, and then you go back to a room and use your souls to get armor. But the thing is, this deck of cards that you're going through is huge, and the amount of cards that are really good in there is small. And the big ones also need you to up your stats a lot, just need you to get lots of souls and go back. So it's like a grind. And yeah, it gets the feel of the game, because in the game you have to grind for all these good things. But if I'm playing a board game, I don't want to spend 1.5 hours doing the same thing. I don't want to go into this room, spend 10 minutes doing it, go into another room, spend 10 minutes doing it, and then reset it and do it again. I mean,
So
the first time we did it, it was kind of cool.
it sounds like, the way you're describing it, what I feared it would be, and one of the reasons I didn't have much interest in it.
It almost probably is.
And what I feared it would be is one element of Kingdom Death,
Yes.
which is just less interesting, in my opinion, because part of the Kingdom Death things, yeah, you're fighting monsters, you're grinding for loot and equipment, but you've got the settlement building, you've got the narrative part, you've got the... Because me and Will have played a couple of rounds of Kingdom Death, haven't we?
Yes, we should mention what it is.
Yeah, we will do. But it just... Dark Souls seems like one part of Kingdom Death without a whole bunch of other interesting parts.
Yeah,
In all fairness, it sounds like the least interesting part of the Kingdom Death monster loot.
Well, I mean, as I
would say
said, the first time I played it, you do the fight, and then you're like, oh, this is cool, because next time we go here, we know how to clear this room really quickly if we can do this. So it's kind
But
of
then
like
you'll
a puzzle.
just clear it the same way every time.
Right, exactly. After you've done that once, then it's just, okay, now we need to puzzle the same 3 rooms again in the exact same way we just did. It's like doing the same Sudoku puzzle 3 times in a row. And it's just to try get better, more arbitrary points to get more cards. It was a shame because the boss fights were really cool and really innovative. And honestly, I would say if you bought the game, it would be fun just to do boss fights. Just set yourself up with some moderate gear, just do boss fights, and that would probably be a lot more fun. Unless you're really into doing 2 hours of grinding in a board game than playing a whole kind of game through.
Okay, so to juxtapose this with Kingdom Death. Kingdom Death is... it's huge, isn't it, Will?
Yeah, it's a very big game.
It's a gorgeous game as well. Honestly, I'm the only company I've seen that produces miniatures on par with Kingdom Death for quality is Games Workshop.
Not Simon.
Almost, but not quite.
Hmm.
Games Workshop take things to another level compared to Simon. Particularly with some of their new stuff. They've upped their game with the extra competition. They've always sort of been ahead of the curve. But the Kingdom Death sculpts are absolutely magnificent.
I've just drawn some up. Oh my god, they look ridiculous. In a good way.
Yeah, they're some of the monsters. The Spidiculus, look how many tiles it takes. Look at the spread on its legs.
Their sight, and I can just see this giant bird thing, and all the feathers look absolutely.
You tend to either get really big miniatures or really high quality miniatures, but in Kingdom Death Monster, the miniatures that they've provided are both.
Look at the spread of how far apart these miniatures are going, and that's a human miniature on its knees for scale.
Oh my god!
And that is a board game with squares, right? So you're gonna have to fight this thing, and every time it moves, it's gonna have legs all over the place.
I mean, does that classify as a miniature anymore?
It's the quality of the miniatures in this game are unbelievable, and they released a version of it initially on Kickstarter. It was a huge hit, and I was really interested in the game, but it seemed to be really hard to get hold of a copy. And they announced Kingdom Death 1.5. And I don't have a big board game collection. I've started to get into the hobby a little more. It's not quite, I don't have anywhere near as many games as Will, but I've just dropped an obscene amount of money on Kingdom Death, which has a base value of $350. I kickstarted it. I've got the base game. I've got 12 existing expansion packs and 5 new expansion packs, plus some extra minis, and the whole gambler's chest worth of extra goodies for kickstarting it, which is, again, about another 30 minis or so.
You should buy Reaper's Bones for like $100 then and fill your collection.
With extra content and cards.
He has a lot of things to paint in the coming months.
And honestly, I'm going to need to buy other minis to practice on, because I need to get better at painting before I touch these minis, or I'm not going to do them justice. I'm seriously considering it for the Pathfinder campaign that I'm eventually planning in about a year. So yeah, it is a horrible aesthetic, but very high quality. The only thing I would compare it to is if anyone has seen the anime Berserk, the ending to it, with demons and faces everywhere, it's utterly horrific. They aim for body horror, which is a very specific sub-brand of visual horror. There are phallic images, there are faces on everything, there are vaginas on everything. It's really grotesque. with grotesque being the right word for it. Everything is designed to be in the uncanny valley to creep out. I mean, you look at the Spedicus, it's got really long hands with fingers that are about 3 times as long as the people. Everything is supposed to be gross and to be unsettling, to the point where my girlfriend, Lisa, has said that she is, she's going to try the game out, but she's not sure she wants to because the miniatures make her uncomfortable. That's what a good job they've done of designing them.
One could say it has probing fingers.
That's how well these monsters have been designed, that they actually actively unsettle some people.
It's impressive.
But the basic idea of Kingdom Death, 3 phases. You've got a hunt phase, where you progress along a track, flipping cards to see what happens whilst you're trying to track a monster. It can get closer or further away. Things happen to injure you before the fight, or distract you, or give you insanities. Then there's the monster fighting phase, which plays like Dark Souls. You've got a deck. Depending on the level of monster you're fighting, you add a certain number of cards from its pool into the deck. When you injure it, you will take one of its face-down cards from the deck and put it in the injury pool, reducing the number of cards in its deck, meaning that the cards it does have are going to come up more. When it's taken an action, you draw the card, you play it. It could put it in a stance, ready to counterattack. It could give it a permanent boost. It could be an action that it takes, and it all has a default action if it cannot take the action on the card for whatever reason. You cycle through them. You keep going until you've put them all in the injury pile. Now, Will and I didn't realise this first few times we played it, and we thought the game was less deadly than intended. We still lost people in the game. So the fact that these fights are now going to take an awful lot longer than we thought they would makes it a lot deadlier. It's a horribly deadly game. Your characters then harvest the dead monster for parts, and you go to the settlement phase. And in the settlement phase, you can spend the parts to research new technologies, to build new equipment, new weapons, new armour. There are settlement events that happen. Every monster hunt is a lantern year. There are 25 to 35 lantern years in the game, depending on expansion packs. And each lantern year takes about 2 to 3 hours in our experience. So, it's a campaign game. Your people will die frequently. You have a whole village. Events can lead you to produce children in the village who will then go on their own monster hunts later, to recruit people, to lose people. The technology tree, you'll spend resources, draw 2 technology cards, pick which one you want, put the other one back. Your deck initially starts quite small. Every time you search something new, it adds new things to your deck. So you research music, you add any music-related card to the deck that has the music symbol on it, which means that you can actually, each playthrough, take it down a different technology tree route based on what you draw and what you choose. So, there's a large number of monsters available in expansion packs that all play completely differently. There's different equipment, there's different story events, there's different technology trees. So it just seems like a game with a huge amount of replayability, even before you factor in the fact that you're going to lose the majority of the campaigns you play whilst trying to beat it before you swap monsters in and out. I've dropped a lot of money. I'm really looking forward to having hard copies and not playing a digital copy. I feel like it's really going to add something to it, and I can't wait to get started on that. And Dark Souls seems like a stripped-down version of it to me.
It certainly is. There's just so much more.
Yeah,
Did
and
Dark
most
Souls
games
get
will feel...
released first?
No, definitely
Okay.
not. Yeah, good few
Yes.
years old.
Oh, really?
Now, obviously, this game might be too big for some people, but each individual play session is only 2 to 3 hours, so it's still, as far as individual sessions go, less than a Twilight Imperium game.
Less
But
than quite a lot of games.
finish
But
it.
it's a campaign.
So we
Well, I
recently
suppose-
started another campaign game, didn't we?
Which
Mike?
we did. Near and Far, which is a really fun game. Have either of you played Near and Far?
I haven't played it, but I know it.
Yeah, really fun game. Unfortunately, we're not going to finish it because Lisa and I are moving back up north. We won't be around to play it with Will. Fun game. Very pretty game. Who is it that designed those, Will?
That's Ryan Lockett again.
Really nice, simple, elegant art style.
Red Raven Games. Yet again, another
Wow.
giant of Kickstarter.
Yeah. Who's the other giant in Kickstarter? Gloomhaven.
Isaac Childress. I don't know if I pronounced that right.
Founders of Gloomhaven, Will. Did you back it or did you not?
I did back it.
Grand. You had concerns, they addressed those concerns.
I had concerns around the lack of art that they had in the prototype copy that they presented on the Kickstarter. I had concerns about the replayability when there is only one board set up. They had, in Kickstarter, there's this concept of stretch goals, and they had stretch goals where they said, we will add art to everything. There was a stretch goal where we'll add a double-sided board to the game. And so they reached those stretch goals, and I was like, this game now seems good. So I backed it.
Did that mean what they did was they made their stretch goals what should have been part of the game anyway?
It's debatable, isn't it?
What arseholes.
Well, you have to give Isaac some credit here. This isn't his first Kickstarter. His previous Kickstarter, the actual game Gloomhaven, was immensely popular amongst the cooperative gaming crowd and the dungeon crawling crowd. But he also had a previous Kickstarter called Forge World, which was also Forge War, which was also very popular. And he used that to build his reputation, and now he's actually producing the games he wanted to produce. So I can't hold it against him, really. He had to get it out. So we could talk about how Gloomhaven is. Gloomhaven is, again, another campaign game where you play cooperatively and you go on dungeon crawls. It's very interesting because it unlocks materials, but as you're unlocking materials, of course, you're being spoiled, so the game world is changing around you. But he's released assets so people can reset that game back to its original starting set so that they can play for it again with another group of people, which is cool. The way legacy games are going. Near and Far has that as well, where, although I have started a campaign with Mike and Lisa, despite them leaving, I could start another campaign with other people, or someone else could take over the campaign where they were. So, this is the way legacy games are going. They're becoming
For the record, I was winning.
Only just. Yeah, we really badly lost the first game, me and Lisa. Yeah, that's the way they're going. Whether that's a good thing or not for legacy games in general is another story, because it kind of also eliminates the issue I was speaking of earlier, where we had the risk legacy packets problem. That wouldn't be an issue if I could just reset it all. Yeah, Founders of Gloomhaven was shown at GenCon. So
some sort of city builder?
It's a city builder where you all play different fantasy races. Each of the fantasy races controls one of the vital resources which are needed to build the city. You go around building the city, eventually building up to these huge prestigious buildings which everyone wants to have been part of the construction of. Whatever is built in the city, if your resources that you control were used to build that building, you'll end up getting points for it. It's a very interesting way of collaboration. So you're collectively working together to build this thing, but you're also in competition, which is what I like. I like games where you have teams with different variable powers or abilities, and they all have to mesh together to create something new.
Crikey, what's the next game with a huge map?
Oh, that is Game of Thrones Catan, but a large version that they've had for display purposes.
Next!
Yeah, it's
I'm shaking my head, but the audience
it's
can't
Catan
see.
with a wall. Let's move on. Oh, and it costs $80. Did we mention that?
Why is the playmat enormous?
To show off at the
Demos.
con, they will often have big versions of
Right,
games.
so it shouldn't be that. It's not going to be that big.
No.
when you play it.
No. You'll have a
That might
normal-sized
justify
version
the
of that.
cost.
I mean, that version is probably cheaper than the one that comes in a cardboard box. Components
And
just
are
things
those
that you
pieces
just
not
craft.
randomly put together either? Are they set?
I'm not sure.
Because
On
part of
that
the appeal of
picture,
Catan,
probably.
and I'm someone who doesn't like Catan very much, right? Is that it's got a lot of replayability because you put things together randomly each time. You can put them together differently each time. If they're just set on a board,
I think it's probably just a printing issue.
what's the point?
It
There is
might
just an
be-
optimal place to play.
It might just be set for demo. Obviously, for a demo, you don't want to have to rejig the whole board every time, so just print one. It's easier.
Yeah. So I don't like Catan. We had a discussion briefly over text, but just to put it into words, these guys were saying Catan is generally a very good game for new players. It's one of the first board games I played that wasn't a round-the-table Monopoly-esque. I hated it. It's just too random. There's very little strategy to it, and the strategy there is just comes around to numerical averages. It's not... I don't get why people think it's fun.
It's for when new players come in and they try it for the first time. It opens that world. They were used to Monopoly, which is not a good game, as I'm sure we'll all agree. But they come in from something like that, and then they've played Catan and been like, "Oh, this is so different." And some people kind of get stuck at that stage and don't discover the rest of board games. And I think, I don't hate Catan, but I would play pretty much any other board game instead. I've not played it much since.
Like, I think I could play Catan, but I don't think I would ever choose to play Catan.
I've played Star Trek Catan, and I
Isn't
enjoyed
much
that.
better.
Was that just the ships, or did you actually just prefer the mechanics with the extra stuff?
There was a lot more going. I have never actually played vanilla Catan, as it were, so I can't actually compare.
The people are a lot nicer addition. I actually don't like the starships because you put them in between as roads and you're just like build up the space. I think it's a bit dumb.
There appears to be a
Should've made it
Breaking
longer.
Bad board game.
What?
It says finally a game that lets you make and sell meth in the comfort of your own home.
Yeah, there's some blue crystals.
Wow.
Oh dear, that shouldn't be their advertising tagline.
It has lots of small blue crystals for you to use.
Oh, I see this game.
There's
Yep,
some little
I see it's using
Formula
like-
1 game.
Oh, another racing game, yeah.
There's what appears to be that little sushi game, but with donuts.
That's basically how they describe that. They were like, "This is Sushi Go, but with donuts."
Delicious.
So
Not go.
It's by the same people as well.
it's entirely pointless. It's the same game, just aimed at people who don't like sushi.
But I mean, I don't like sushi, but I like Sushi Go.
I like sushi.
I prefer sushi to Sushi Go.
Did you not rate Sushi Go then, Mike?
I didn't dislike it. I didn't like it. Was a take it or leave it game for me. It's there wasn't enough to it for me. I don't think.
Yeah,
But it is only a 10-minute game.
Sushi Go is my new we're deciding what to play game. Sushi Go has taken over. I used to use King of Tokyo as my people have just turned up to my house. I want something something people have just turned up to my house.
That's
We haven't
what I
decided
do
what
as
game
well.
we're playing for the evening yet. Here's something that takes half an hour and is quite quick. And one of the benefits of the knockout process in King of Tokyo is it gives those people time to think about what they want to play.
Yeah, we always use Lords of Waterdeep for that. That's our go-to.
That's quite a long game, though.
Good hour and a half, right? I mean, I love Waterdeep as well, so
Yeah, we really enjoy it.
Don't get me wrong, it's a good game. I wouldn't use it as a filler, though.
I wouldn't use it.
I
as
guess
a
we
filler
don't
either.
really use filler. If we're playing board games, we're playing board games. Otherwise, we just fill with conversation.
But I think that there's something about that. You're waiting on two people to arrive. Well, Sushi Go, you can add people in as they turn up. That's why Sushi Go is a bit better than the others because it's very quick and like if you are just waiting on one or two people to turn up before you make a decision.
It's just a munchkin, isn't it? It's a munchkin.
No.
No, because Munchkin takes forever, like literally your entire evening.
Munchkin takes literally forever.
because it's just screwing each other over, and then you're like, "Oh, I'm just going to win." Oh, screw it.
Or Flux.
Yeah, it's a
Fucking
flux. Flux is quick.
I hate Flux so much.
Is
Ah,
that
I
why
hate
someone
it
like
more than-
me takes 4 turns?
I might dislike it more than Munchkin.
Really?
I mean,
love
I'm
Flux.
not sure. It's debatable. I'll have to think about that. I
It's
really
a
don't
really
like either of those
thinky game.
games.
I don't mind either of those. I don't love either of them, but I don't mind either of them. So the last one on this list is Codenames.
We skipped over one because
Oh,
they're
did we?
both slightly related. Well, yeah. So Captain Sonar, if you haven't played it, is amazing.
I thought that was Battleships.
Captain Sonar is an 8-player game where there's 4 people on one submarine and 4 people on the other submarine, and you're trying to work out where the other players are in a battleships-like way, but the submarine is constantly moving and going underwater and popping up, and you have to work as a team to work out where the other team are, draw yourself properly on the map, and also load and fire torpedoes and deal with damage.
But it requires 8 players. That
Or
is...
less. There's a lesser player version.
I was going to say, that is quite a prerequisite.
It's
Yeah,
six or
it doesn't
8, I think,
require them,
in the basic one.
but realistically, you shouldn't play it without it.
Yeah, it was really fun. I've played it once. Well, I played it twice back to
No,
back.
it
was really cool.
You know, it looked like Battleships, but you just made it sound cool.
I can't
No,
see
it's
a
so much
picture
better
of
than
that.
Battleships. It's so cool.
It's there. Sonar is a 4-player version of Captain Sonar. So I just thought we'd mention it because it kind of fits in a bit.
Oh,
Yeah,
there it is.
It fits in a bit
That's
with what's
interesting.
happening with Codenames Duet, which is a similar thing. Codenames, very popular game. It's a big party game. Codenames Duet is the same idea, kind of. It's a co-op game, and it is for less players. And it's actually coming out on Friday, which when this podcast airs means it will already be out in the UK, and it's only like £12. So it's actually probably one of the cheapest games that are on this list. And I'm pretty tempted to get it just to see how it is, because I know other people who own normal Codenames, so I might buy that.
I'm not sure I can see the appeal of Codenames Duet. Like, Codenames is good, and it's a good game because you get to get sparks from about 4 different people, and you're like, oh, I've got to find a link that makes this, this person will understand this reference. And then some people just instantly get it, and some people don't, and they're debating.
and
I don't
that's
see
when
the
it's
appeal of how
fun.
that's going to get reduced to 2 people. I don't see it myself.
That's why it's poor for some people, because some people will be left out. So you have to imagine playing this with an old duffer of a father like I have. He just will not get any of the words, and one team will always win. That's not necessarily fun for everyone. This is the whole co-op movement, which is one of the trends the past few years, and more co-op games, because everyone gets to have fun together. The same logic applies to co-op making a co-op version.
However, there are drawbacks potentially to co-op games, or at least the way that a lot of co-op games have been made. And they're less to do with the game and more to do with player behaviours. I love a good co-op game, but there is a risk, and some people don't like it. I've heard people express a dislike for co-op in general.
Myself included.
It is. I wasn't going to name names. Because there is a risk that one player is essentially playing the game and everyone else is just moving pieces.
Yeah.
There is always a huge risk that someone goes, well, actually, the optimal move is to go here, here, and here. And everyone else will go, or the player whose turn it is will go, oh, but I was going to... Yeah, you're right. And they'll be making the choice to move that piece themselves because obviously it is the most optimal move that someone else has pointed out to them, so why would they do something else? But it essentially means they're not even playing the game anymore.
Yeah, no, it is a real issue.
And this has happened in our group.
Yeah, it's happened to us as well.
In recent time.
Mentioning no names.
Yeah, and somebody was a little bit upset. So it's a risk that can happen with co-op games. So I think everyone going into a co-op game needs to sort of be aware of that risk if they are a board gamer rather than, say, a casual player.
Well, the thing we had with Codenames the other day when we played it at my board game festival was people complaining about the couples in the game because they could, in the same way that articulate is in some ways easier if you're a couple, you can say a thing that people won't put two and two together with. And for people like, well, you should split up the couples because of that. It's not quite the same, but it's a different balancing issue.
That is competitive to the point of pettiness, in my opinion.
Yeah.
If you care enough about winning that you feel the need to split couples up and not let them play together, you're a dick. You need to dial it back and learn to have fun. And you need to stop trying to impede on other people's fun to ensure your own.
Yeah, it was a passing comment. I don't think the person was particularly serious.
Yeah. You can make a jokey comment about it, but the minute someone actually complains about that, they need a slap.
Charming. Wait, Tom, did you say board game festival?
Yes, I did.
That was a totally unobtrusive segue.
Let's just dial it back to that statement to get rid of some of the negative air that I've just aired and switch to something positive. Tom, board game festivals? Whatever do you mean?
I've been running a small-scale board game festival for, well...
And did you know you're the second one of my friends to do this?
I didn't. Who's the other one who does it?
Mark Adams.
Oh, I mean, he is magic. So.
Yes.
Related to Brian Adams?
I think not. But
Shame.
possible. And he runs something that his friends have been referring to for decades as Adams Fest. Or Adams Con, I think it is.
Well, we call Wilco's Wilco. Well, Wilco's
Board Game Festival.
Well, yeah, it could just be shortened to Wilco Fest, really.
Or Wilkfest.
Nah, Wilco Fest.
Yeah, that doesn't sound as good, does it?
Nah.
So, Wilco's, why don't you tell us about Wilfest?
That's what he was angling for, clearly. No. So, I mean, basically, I have a lot of friends who like board games, and a lot of friends spread out over the country I don't get to see as often as I'd like. Turns out a good way to get them all in the one place for a weekend is to offer alcohol and board games. A few years back, I realised you could rent the rooms above the game shop in Aldershot, which is very nice. And I also knew a campsite nearby which was out the front of a pub. So we basically booked that out for the weekend, and fun was had by all. We've now moved it somewhere else because basically I have access to a very large scout hall for a small, relatively small fee, and it's quite easy, for 20-odd quid per person to rent the place out for the weekend, do food for everyone, and just give a space with lots of tables to play board games. And yeah, it seems to go quite well. Lots of people turn up. This was a rather small one just because of the timing, but we're trying to book the next one in well in advance so that people can come.
Do you anticipate this growing, or do you anticipate it staying roughly the same?
I don't know. I have a lot more people in the group than turn up, but I think that's just, when you
would
book
you
things
like
with
to
friends.
grow it, to expand that community? Or would you like to keep it a thing for your friends?
I do occasionally think about it. Like normally when I'm in the lead up to running a particular one, and I feel like I could probably increase the size of it to there's an extent to which I could increase the size of it without it being a massive problem. And there's always a few friends who are willing to do something like help cater or whatever. And I have a group of friends who are very good at running events, and we've run a lot of events for scouting and guiding kind of activities. But I'm not sure. I don't know if I have a lot of stuff on my plate as it is. Editing podcasts, jobs, actual real life job as opposed to just doing podcasts, and playing war games, which I, if I could do that all the time, maybe I would.
I'm going to have to bring Kingdom Death to it, aren't I?
Oh, you might not get paid.
I feel if you were to expand it, Wilco, you'd have to regiment it a lot more, which would be which some people wouldn't take kindly to.
Registering people for certain games at certain times and stuff.
Well, I mean, just
I was kind of left out
sure
one time when I visited. So
it happens.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
But it's cool if you're the person that doesn't know as many people.
Yeah, and it's hard for me to keep track of that when people turn up because I'm running around between everything else. So yeah, if it was bigger, it's one of those things you'd have to have a system. And I like designing systems, but I'm not sure I have the time to.
Whereas I was well looked after by a lady named Boob.
Oh yes, she's very accommodating.
Who?
That's not a euphemism. She's just very nice.
So that was GenCon. That was long. That was possibly an entire podcast.
That is what a podcast is. Well, it's what a podcast about board games is.